Hi, in this lesson we are going to look at enhanced for loop. It is also called Foreach loop. Here we have a array, that is integer array, having 5 elements and the values are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So previously we have seen many times how to print this array using simple for loop. Because the length is 5, we need to start at index 0, then we have to go till index 4. Then we are printing all the elements. If you observe, here we are not making any changes to array contents. We are simply reading the array and we are printing that. There are similar situations, like if we want to find out the sum of elements in array, we don't need to modify the array. We just need to read the array and then sum those values up. So these are the situations when we have just need to read the array. We don't need to make any changes to array. So in these situations, there is a different way of writing this for loop, and that is very concise and less error prone. What do we mean by that? Let's look at a different loop, that is enhanced for loop. So we have to print, right? For each element in AI, we have to print that element. So how can we write it in enhanced for loop is for. So it starts just like for actual for loop. Okay, so each element. So what is each element? Each element is a integer, right? We declare a variable of int. In Java, in is not a keyword. So instead of in, we simply use colon. Okay, so this is how we write for each loop. For each element in array, what do we want to do? We want to print that, right? So this is how we print it. So if we compare these two, enhanced for loop is more readable. Also, it is less error prone. In the previous case, we have to make sure we don't go out of bounds. So if we write here instead of less than or equal to, then it is going to fail at the runtime and the program will be terminated. So let's run that. Okay. So here we have got a array index out of bounds exception because we are trying to access the element at index 5, but that is not there. Index 4 is the maximum, right? So here there is a possibility for making errors, but here there is no such possibility. Okay, those are two advantages of for each loop over simple for loop. Okay, so if it has advantages, why can't we use for each loop all the time, right? If it is more readable and if it is less error prone, why shouldn't we use for each loop all the time? And why do we have for loop? Okay, if you see here, for each loop will work with only arrays and also collections. Collections we haven't seen yet. But for can work with anything, like for example, previously we have printed numbers from 1 to 10. So in those scenarios, for each loop is not suitable at all because we can't print 1 to 10 using for each loop. For each loop works only with arrays and collections. So there are limitations to for each loop. It is not a replacement for loop. Okay, another thing to note here is when we are simply reading elements, it is better to use for each loop, but we can't make the changes to actual array. Let's look at that. Here what I am trying to do is I am iterating the array using simple for loop. So every time I am modifying the existing element AI at index I with a value of I into 2. So element at index 0 will have a value of 0. Index at element at index 1 will have a value of 2. At index 3 it is going to save 3 into 2 6. At index 4 it is going to save 8. So after this one, the array will be modified. Previously, if you remember, array is 1 2 3 4 5, but after this array is going to be 0 2 4 6 8. Let's print that. Let's run once and see that the array is modified. Okay, here we can clearly see that array is modified. Now, can we do that using for each loop? That is not possible. If you see here, we are defining a variable, right? This variable I is not looping through indexes. It is actually a variable that is holding each element. For the first iteration, it is going to have a value of first element, but this value is copy of that element. Okay, so when we are multiplying with 3 and assigning to I, we are making these changes to this variable. We are not making these changes to actual array contents. So that is the reason we can't modify the array elements. So if we print now, the AI will be unmodified. If at all, if for loop can modify the elements, the actual elements should be 0, 3, 3 into 2 6, 3 into 3 9, 3 into 4 12. So if at all it is able to modify that, those are the values, but that is not the case. If you see here, the elements in the array are not modified. You may think that this is the case because these are primitive types, but it is the same case with the reference type variables also, whether those references are of mutable type or unmutable type. Okay, so what did we understand till now? While reading, simple for loop and enhanced for loop will behave the same, but to modify the existing elements in the array, we have to use the for loop. We can't use enhanced for loop. Okay, with that in mind, let's see when to use for loop, when to use for each loop. Okay, first we will go for each loop. Whenever we need to iterate through all the elements, we can go for each loop. Also, not only we go through all the elements, we don't need to make any changes. So if these two conditions are satisfied, then we will go for each loop. We have to iterate through all the elements and we don't need to make any changes to the array. Okay, that is about for each loop. When do we go for loop? Whenever we need to partially iterate through our array, then we go for simple for loop. Also, whenever we need the index value, then we will go for simple for loop. In for each loop, there is no concept of index at all. Okay, so we need the index if we need to modify the values of the array. So whenever we need index values, we have to go for simple for loop. Also, whenever the elements in the array need to be modified, we have to go for simple for loop. Okay, so these are the guidelines. We have to go for each loop if these two conditions are satisfied. We have to go for simple for loop if these conditions are satisfied. Okay, so I hope you are very clear on the differences. Here we are actually working on array elements, so that is the reason we were able to modify those elements. But in case of enhanced for loop, we are working on only a variable that is copy of actual elements. So let's see that in a PowerPoint presentation that will give you more idea on what is happening actually. You should be able to visualize what is happening with these statements. Okay, let's go to PowerPoint. Okay, now we are going to see simple for loop first, then we will look at for each loop. Okay, we have declared a array with the values 11, 22, 33, 44, 55. These are different values from what we have seen in our example. Okay, this is the array. When we are using for loop, simple for loop, we start with index 0. What we are doing, for the element at index 0, we are assigning 0 into 2, that is 0. In the next iteration, I will be 1. For the element at index 1, we are going to assign value of 2, that is 1 into 2. For the element at index 2, we are going to assign a value of 4, that is 2 into 2. And for the element at index 3, we are going to assign 6. For the element at index 4, we are going to assign a value of 8. So once the iteration is complete, then the array will become 0, 2, 4, 6, 8. So those are the values in this array. Okay, now let's look at for each loop. As we have seen in our example, for each loop will not be able to modify this array. Okay, let's look at that. Here, for the first iteration, here I is not index, I is a variable of integer type. Okay, this is going to have the value of first element, that is 0. Okay, so what we are doing with that, we are multiplying with 2 and assigning to I. So I will become 2, but original array element 1 will not be modified. For the next iteration, I is going to be 2 and it will be multiplied with 3. So I will be changed to 6, but actual array second element will not be modified. In the next iteration, I will be 4 because that is the third element in our actual array. So I will have a value of 4, it will be multiplied with 3 and I will become 12. then I will be 6, then I will be assigned a value of 18, then I will be 8 because that is the fifth element in the array. So I is going to have the value of fifth element in this fifth iteration, and I will be assigned a value of 24. So if you see here in this loop, only the value of I is changing. Actual array elements are untouched. Okay, we are going to, the for each loop is going to get the values and assign it to variable I, but actual array will not be touched in the sense it won't be modified. Okay, so once this loop is complete, the AI will be still 0 to 468. Okay, that is what we have seen in our program. I hope you understood with this visual presentation. If you still have any questions, please mention them in the comments. I will reply. Thank you for watching this video. Please subscribe and share it with others. Thank you.